Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a story that honestly feels straight out of a movie, but it's actually one of the most foundational lessons in modern financial literature. We're heading way back in time to 1956, to a little sugar plantation town in Hawaii. This is where a profound, life-changing journey to wealth begins for a 9-year-old boy. And over the next few minutes, we're going to break down exactly how the rich think completely differently about money than the rest of us.
So the whole thing kicks off with this incredibly innocent but just massively heavy question. Dad, can you tell me how to get rich? 9-year-old Robert actually asked his father this right after being totally excluded by the wealthy kids at his public school. See, the mother of this boy named Jimmy had just rolled up in a brand new Cadillac to take a bunch of kids to their beach house for the weekend. And Robert, along with his best buddy Mike, they weren't invited. Why? Well, simply because they were the quote-unquote poor kids. You know that sting of being left out? Well, for Robert, that sting sparked a serious fire.
And that brings us right into Section 1, the quest for wealth.
Now, Robert and Mike didn't just sit around feeling sorry for themselves, which is pretty impressive for 9-year-olds. They decided right then and there to team up, become partners, and crack the code on making money. But obviously, they needed some advice. And this right here, this contrast is basically the foundation of everything we're going to talk about. On one hand, you have Robert's biological father, who we'll call Poor Dad. Now, Poor Dad was highly educated, he worked a solid government job, and his philosophy was super traditional. Study hard, get good grades, and land a safe, secure job. Makes sense, right? But then on the flip side, you have Mike's father, who becomes the legendary Rich Dad. He was a pure entrepreneur who actually dropped out of school early, and his philosophy was completely disruptive. He believed you literally have to learn how to make money work for you.
But, before the boys ever even sat down with Rich Dad, they tried to figure it out on their own. Poor Dad had vaguely told them to use their heads to make money. So what did? They took him literally. They ran around the neighborhood and collected hundreds of used lead toothpaste tubes. Then they fired up the family's hibachi grill, melted down the lead over these glowing red coals, and carefully poured the molten metal into little plaster of Paris molds they'd shoved inside old milk cartons. Oh, and the porch? It looked like a total white dust storm had hit it. It was a mess. But what they were doing was actually insane. They were literally trying to mint their own nickels out of lead.
Well, as you might guess, Robert's dad came home with a buddy and walked right into this chaotic, slightly illegal, makeshift manufacturing plant on his front porch. He had to sit the boys down and gently, introduce them to the word counterfeiting. So yeah, the business was an absolute total failure on day one. But here's the cool part. His dad didn't yell. Instead, he praised their incredible creativity and their hustle. They didn't just sit around dreaming about being rich, they actually took action. And it was that exact same drive that pushed them to go find a real mentor.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, meeting the mentor. Realizing he couldn't teach them what they wanted to know, Robert's dad pointed the boys toward Mike's dad. Now, Mike's dad was a guy who already owned warehouses, construction companies, restaurants, the whole shebang. But the really crucial thing here is exactly how Rich Dad agreed to take them on. He didn't just hand them a textbook or sit them down for a lecture. No way. He gave them an ultimatum. He looked at them and said, "I will teach you, but not in a classroom. If you work for me, I will teach you. If not, I won't." He firmly believed that life is the absolute best teacher, and the way life teaches you is by pushing you around.
So the boys accept, which kicks off Section 3, the 10-cent lesson.
10 cents. Yep, that was their hourly wage. Now, even back in 1956, 10 cents an hour was ridiculously low. I mean, to put that into perspective for you, a brand new comic book back then cost exactly 10 cents. So Robert had to bust his chops for a full hour just to afford a single comic book.
And honestly, the work itself was absolutely brutal. Every single Saturday morning for 3 solid hours, Robert and Mike had to work in one of Rich Dad's early convenience stores. Picture this. It's an unair-conditioned little shop baking in the Hawaiian heat. And because the front doors had to stay propped open for customers, every single time a car pulled into the dirt parking lot, this huge cloud of dust would just blow right in and settle over all the canned goods. So what did the boys do? They dusted cans, endlessly. It was agonizing, mind-numbing labor. And the worst part? Rich Dad was literally nowhere to be seen.
So, by the 4th week, Robert hits his absolute breaking point. I mean, his blood is boiling, he's being paid literal pennies, doing miserable work, and his supposed mentor hasn't taught him a single thing. So Robert just storms right into Rich Dad's office. He demands a raise, basically accuses the guy of exploiting child labor, and is totally ready to just quit on the spot. But he didn't realize he was walking right into a brilliantly set trap.
And that trap is our 4th section, fear and greed.
See, Rich Dad wasn't mad at Robert's little outburst at all. Actually, he was thrilled. He told Robert he sounded exactly like most of his adult employees. And this is where he introduces the concept of the rat race. It's this endless, exhausting cycle that is driven almost entirely by two deep human emotions: fear and greed. First, you have the fear of not having money, right? That forces people to go get a job. They work hard, they finally get that paycheck, and then boom, the second emotion takes over: greed, or desire. They want nicer things, a better car, a bigger house, so they spend whatever they just earned.
And this trap just loops day in and day out. Wake up, go to work, pay the bills, wake up again. The fear keeps them clinging to a job they might absolutely hate, and the desire keeps them spending whatever money they do make, which practically guarantees they have to go right back to work the next day just to pay the new bills. It's a totally closed loop. Actually, just take a second to reflect on your own routine. Does your week look a little too much like this cycle?
Which brings us to the core thesis of our explainer today. This is the big one. Rich Dad looked right into 9-year-old Robert's eyes and said, "The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them." And in that exact moment, Robert's entire perspective just shattered. He suddenly realized that by storming in and demanding 10 cents or even 25 cents an hour, he was literally begging to learn how to work for money. He was begging to stay in the trap.
But Rich Dad wasn't done. To really prove to the boys how powerful fear and greed are, he decided to test them right then and there. He sat them down and offered them 25 cents an hour. Robert's heart fluttered, but he kept his mouth shut. Then, Rich Dad ups it to $1 an hour. Nothing. Finally, Rich Dad offers them $5 an hour. Guys, in 1956, for a 9-year-old kid, that was an astronomical fortune. Robert's brain was absolutely screaming at him to take the deal. He could buy a new bike, new clothes, anything he wanted. But the boys just sat there, in complete silence. They didn't take the bait. By resisting $5 an hour, they proved that the part of their soul that couldn't be bought was actually stronger than the part driven by greed. Logic and discipline defeated a pure emotional reaction, and because of that, they were finally truly ready to learn how to master money instead of just serving it.
So how do we actually get out? That brings us to our final section: escaping the rat race.
The very first step is just awareness. Most people react with their heart, saying things like, "I'm scared, I just need a safe job to pay my bills." But Rich Dad taught the boys to step back and think with their heads. And for Robert and Mike, using their heads meant suddenly noticing a hidden opportunity while they were working for absolutely free in that dusty convenience store. They noticed that the store manager was actually throwing away the old, unsold comic books. Instead of reacting with anger about their unpaid, dusty labor, their brains turned on. They approached the distributor and asked if they could just keep the discarded comics, swearing they would never resell them.
So many adults let money completely control their emotions. They'll spend 40 years working a job out of the sheer terror of not being able to pay the bills, all while pretending they don't really care about money. But these two kids didn't fall into that trap. They took those discarded comic books and opened up a little library right in Mike's basement. They hired Mike's younger sister to run it, and they charged the neighborhood kids 10 cents for admission. For that single dime, a kid could come in and read as many comics as they wanted in 2 hours. It was a massive bargain for the kids, and for Robert and Mike, they stopped letting the lack of a paycheck control them, and they built their very first true asset.
Rich Dad left the boys with this totally brilliant, unforgettable metaphor. He said working for money out of fear and greed is exactly like being a donkey pulling a heavy cart, endlessly chasing a carrot that's dangled on a stick by the owner. The donkey is just exhausting itself, chasing the illusion of a meal, while the owner goes wherever he wants. But by opening that comic book library, Robert and Mike stepped out of the harness. They stopped being the donkey. That little business made them $9.50 a week in pure profit, even when they were off doing something else. They had finally made money work for them.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to end on today. Take a hard look at your own life. Are you actively taking control of your financial destiny, or are you still just a donkey chasing a carrot? It might be time to stop reacting out of fear, start using your head, and build your own comic book library. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you in the next one.